Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and you're going to have an incredible Monday. Because you know why? Because I'm back on. You're listening to Highly Respected as you're driving home from work. You may be braving the snow or other wintry conditions out there, but no need to fear. It's all warm and cozy in your car while you're hearing my beautiful voice come through your car speakers or wherever you're listening to Highly Respected. So hope you're ready for another incredible episode. I know every week you're just like, is Scott actually going to say this is, a mediocre episode? It's time to turn off. You can put it in the background. You don't need to listen. And then boom, it's another incredible episode. Like, whoa, I can't believe, how does he do this every week? And, when you're high IQ and highly respected, you're just able to do this. So it's a superpower. It's in some ways, it's a burden. But going into the topics, we're not going back into anything. We're going into the topics. One big subject I want to discuss today, I've got a few minor subjects to talk about at the end, or not really minor subjects, but shorter discussions at the end after the major topic. And of course, a wonderful cognitive elite question we have at the end. But the first big topic I want to talk about, and this is what I'm going to discuss most of the episode, is the challenges of alt tech. I think a lot of this has been in discussion because last week, it's still technically last week. I think she got banned on Monday or late Sunday. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Georgia's favorite congresswoman, got banned from Twitter. She had apparently for spreading COVID disinformation. That's what they said. And she had repeated violations and they kicked her off. I think most of our listeners are familiar with the story, so I won't bore you with the details about why she got kicked off and all the peculiarities. And so when this happens, and any time a major figure gets booted, and this also follows Robert Malone, who's a famous scientific researcher, who's a big vax skeptic, and some others who got banned. And so people are like, now whenever these trends happen, or there's a major figure who gets banned and it creates a lot of media attention, people began to flee or to consider the alternatives to what we have to Twitter. And sure enough, there are two alternatives to Twitter waiting for this moment to occur, and those are Gettr and Gab. And the first thing I want to discuss is the issues that have been surrounding Gettr, and then we'll go into just the bigger picture of what's going on with alt tech. Gettr is now the new Parler. Well, really Parler. The funny thing about Parler is Parler's proper pronunciation is parlay. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be a French word, but of course it's like appealing to people who are never going to speak French. And if they were told it's French, they would greatly insist on that it's supposed to be Parler. That's actually the funniest thing is like all the creators like, it's actually supposed to be parlay. No, their entire user base is saying Parler. But it's now the new Parler in that it's seeking to be a very MAGA friendly, normie conservative alternative to Twitter. It's got a lot of people who were involved in the Trump administration who are involved in it. Jason Miller is the main guy behind it. He was a top Trump advisor, still is advisor to Trump. Him and Guo, this Chinese billionaire named Guo, who a lot of people don't like for various reasons. Some people say he's still in the pay of the Chinese Communist Party or whatever, but for whatever reason, he's spending a lot of money on conservative causes and pro-Trump causes, and they're the main people behind it. Now, Parler, for the most part, when it was a big thing, Parler is back. That's something to remember, is that a lot of people don't realize this, but Parler is back. Not many people are using it. It's mainly its main problem was right after January 6th, and when Trump got banned, it was at its peak, and then they went after it. They took it down. Many of the major servers said we're no longer to host this app. I think, Apple, was like, we're not going to allow this to be on iPhones. We're not going to allow this to be a downloadable app. And there was also problems with their domain, wanting to kick them off and various other problems that they had, but eventually came back with a greater promise to censor and to get rid of trolls and all the rhetoric that made it get kicked off after January 6th. So it's come back, but it's like a shadow of itself. Nobody's really on it. I have not heard about anyone being on Parler in a long time. So into the breach comes Gettr. And Gettr has a close relationship with Trump and a lot of MAGA people. A lot of people are heavily supportive of it. But unlike Parler, for when Parler was getting really big in 2021, or not really 2021, 2020, Gettr has built-in censorship, and people are getting up in arms over this, righteously so, because Nick Fuentes is banned for that. Like, there's rumors that you can't even say Graper on there. Even major conservatives or mainstream conservatives like Elijah Schaffer are reporting getting censored on there, and you can't make any criticism of Guo or Jason Miller on there, or there's like several problems with Gettr and people saying that there is a lot of censorship on there. Which, if you look back and like, I think there was some censorship on Parler in late 2020 and early 2021 when it was like at its peak and when it's very popular. I know Gab and others, made the complaints about it. I can't remember exactly what were the complaints about censorship. All I remember is that at Parler, that the reason the liberals were honing in on is that there was a ton of QAnon people there who were calling for total insurrection, like even some like terrorist attacks, and it was some wild posting on Parler. I think Lynn Wood and others were like reaching tens of thousands of people and saying some really off the chart stuff. Maybe not the most responsible rhetoric, you would say. And the funniest thing about Parler is when they had all these QAnon theories that Biden was not really inaugurated on January 20th. There was some really funny stuff about how like it was like Trump wearing a mask and stuff, and it was really funny that they had this. They're gone, but all that is now gone. All that great content is no longer with us because they Parler instituted its rules. But that's the stuff that got like Parler kicked off, and I think Gettr is now like thinking like, okay, all the big tech and the providers are going to kick us off unless we censor. So we're going to start off with censorship so we avoid what happens to Parler, and people come in with the expectation of that there's censorship. But a lot of this seems unreasonable. Like, why are they censoring Nick Fuentes? I don't think he's calling for violence. I don't think that there's like any of these people who are calling for violence. Like, there is like a minimum, like the minimum standard for tech censorship probably should be if like people are like, I'm going to show up to this place and shoot it up. Yeah, you probably should censor that. Maybe like you might want to wonder, unless it's like clearly a joke, maybe you might want to alert some authorities about that, because there have been problems with like people making like violent threats on social media and then they carry it out. I mean, Gab had this problem in 2018 where I think there was some synagogue shooting in 2018, and the guy was like a prolific Gab user, and then they used this as a justification to go after Gab and kick it off its hosting platforms. And Gab had a lot of problems in late 2018. It was successfully was able to overcome that, came back stronger, much more independent and self-sufficient in 2019, but it had a lot of problems due to, people, making a lot of violent threats, and then a few of them carrying them out, or at least one person carrying them out. So there's that's like a basic standard that you could say that like there should be maybe some censorship, but otherwise outside of that, people like are expressing different points of view. Like, you should be able to criticize the people who are running this platform. I mean, Twitter allowed that. Facebook, of course, allows that. Like, all the big platforms allow criticism of like the people running it. I don't know why Gettr can't do that. I think Gettr, it's censorship. You could say that, like, if they came out with the thing like, we're going to allow no violent rhetoric or no threats of violence. And, even with Gab, like Gab has an enforcement standard of like not allowing doxing. If they had those basic standards, I think most people are like, okay, we'll try to follow them. But clearly they're exceeding their censorship mandate and going after people that, clearly don't deserve it. And if they're trying to present themselves as a free speech alternative to Twitter, and people are complaining that they have more free speech on Twitter than they do on Gettr, that's a problem for Gettr. But I'm not entirely anti-Gettr. The more the are alternatives to Twitter, the merrier. I'm very supportive of Gab. I know I need to post more on Gab. Everyone is always like, Scott, get on Gab more. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I just forget. It's not because of anything against Gab. It's just that I forget. And it's almost the one problem with like having so many platforms. Like I have to post on Telegram, Twitter, is that, you put all your energy into one platform and then you're like thinking, it's like, ah, shit, I got to post more on these others. I have that problem with Telegram and Gab. I know I need to post more on Gab. I know a lot of people are there. It's good. Very supportive of Gab. I don't have really any real serious. I don't have any criticism of Gab. I'm very supportive of Gab, but I'm also supportive of any other alternative to the big tech platforms. I think like with Gab has its own reputation. I think a lot of normie conservatives are using it, and other people who are not a part of the original fan base among Gab, so to speak, who are joining it, and they like the total free speech that they have, which is great. But a lot of people maybe be turned off if they go there. They're seeing like, I don't really like some of these conversations. There may be too much free speech for people, and some people may just prefer a more normie conservative alternative, even though there are plenty of normie conservatives on Gab as well. But I mean, the main base is the people who were getting on Gab in 2016 and 2017, which is not exactly normie conservatives, but that's fine. That's what people want to be. And I think with Gettr is that they want to provide a place where I think one of the problems with Gab is that a lot of big figures probably are not going to go to Gab for a variety of reasons. One, they still have the built-in reputation of Gab, whether right or wrong. And a lot of people, they'll go there, and if they spend a lot of time, they'll see like their notifications, because of like the predominant people who are on Gab, who are very active Gab users, are probably not going to like a lot of the big figures that they want to get on. Some of the more normie conservatives or others who are going to go on, they're going to see a lot of people are going to be more hostile to them, but then they could bring over their own fans. So I think a lot of people, they want a place where they would know that it's most of their fan base, and that if they're posting stuff and they're checking their mentions, they're seeing a more positive reaction to their things. Not saying that couldn't happen with Gab, but that's what just people perceive it as. And I think there is some overcoming of that. There are lawmakers who are getting on Gab. There are some other personalities who are big personalities who are getting on Gab. Mainstream conservatives who are getting on Gab. But I think for the most part, a lot of those big, figures that are the draws for like, a platform to really start off being like, like the fact that Joe Rogan got on Gettr, that's a big draw for Gettr. I don't know if somebody like Joe Rogan would get on Gab. I mean, it would be nice if they did. It would be cool if they did. But for whatever reason, they're not going to get on Gab. And that's why these other alternatives keep popping up, is that a lot of these places, they just want an alternative where it's primarily boomers and MAGA people who now realize that Twitter and Facebook will censor them, and they want to go to some place where they can boomer post in peace. They can do that on Gab, but for whatever reason, they do not want to get on Gab at this moment, or they prefer another alternative. And there is some potential for growth for Gettr. I mean, they need to correct their free speech stuff. I mean, they need to let like people like Nick Fuentes on and not be autistic about who they're censoring and being so little-minded that they're going to ban people for criticizing the people behind it, or like these algorithms they have to hide people and other things. They need to correct those problems. If they correct those problems, they could have some serious growth. And I think there are some potential areas of growth for a lot of these platforms, like getting into like trying to attract like people who are not necessarily interested in politics. I mean, what makes Twitter interesting is that everybody's on there, or well, not everybody, because it's not real world, but theoretically everybody is on there. I mean, people with a wide array of interests, that it's not just politics, and it attracts the entire political spectrum. It attracts sports fans, gamers, all these people is people who like to follow celebrities, and tons of normies, even though it's not as normie centric as Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, but it is attracting those people. I mean, most of the people who are going to Gab are very into politics, very into right-wing politics, and that's their primary base, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. That's just the people that it's attracting. And the only people who are going to likely go there are those who feel that their fans are on there. Like me. I know I got a lot of Gabber fans. So I'm going to go on and try to interact with those people, even though I need to do it more often. I know, I'm aware of that problem. We're going to try to work on that in the new year. So that's the only reason why you're going to go there. And it's the same with like Parler and Gettr, is that most of the people who are going there are those who are getting censored for political views. and they need an alternative. And generally, the people they're going to be talking to is themselves, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that does, that does decrease the quality of the performance. And that's not the fault of these platforms. I mean, these platforms need to exist. They need to give us a room to speak. But the reason why people really like Twitter is it is like everywhere. Everyone is on that. And it could be you're dunking on some big time actor, and then that actor responds to you, and then you have a viral tweet just due to this feud you're having with this big time actor or this politician, and it creates this Wild West phenomenon. I get that for lack of a better term, it creates this type of setting that can't exist anywhere else. And, there are many great things about Gab and other places, but you don't necessarily have the quality of like you being able to tell like John Cusack or, these idiotic celebrities to, fuck off, or like how idiotic they are, or some famous like writer, like how much of their idiot they are. And then they respond to you. And then that creates this, great content as well. I know that's that can't be recreated at this moment, at least on Gab. And due to the wide variety of people who are on Twitter and elsewhere, it's like it creates all these like ridiculous posts that you see, and then you're like, how is this there? And it creates, just great content. Like I remember there was some post about a woman who claimed her dad was a KKK Grand Wizard in the 70s, who then killed like 20 Vietnamese, or I think over 30 Vietnamese shrimpers on a boat in Louisiana, or no, in Texas, and nobody ever investigated. And then you're like, what? How did no one investigate this in the late 70s? It's completely made up, and people always make up this stuff. And that's like, it makes it like this fun, wild place where you just see the complete nadir of liberal idiocy, along with like even stupid conservative points, and even just like random normies being idiots. And you just see that and you interact with that. And it's also where a lot of the news happens, like politicians making statements that, make news cycles, reporters, talking amongst themselves and creating a narrative. You can observe that on Twitter. And those are the type of things that like why people keep returning to Twitter. And why not necessarily, alt tech is needed, but it can't fully replace the main platforms, just for the reasons that the big ones act as the public forums of our day. If it's like, going back in time, you're going to the city, the town square, and you see all the happenings going on in your town. That's the same with Twitter, but it's the whole globe. You just see, you see a ton of freaks. You see people sharing news. You see people, the leaders of the town acting like idiots or saying something that's noteworthy. That's what you go to see when you go on Twitter. And Gab is a different, it's a different thing. It's you and people that are like-minded going and talking to yourselves, which is needed and is necessary, because, the alternative is like, we don't even get to talk to ourselves. And it does draw in people who are like, I'm tired of this free speech, or I'm tired of the censorship of speech and the thought control on the big platforms. I'm going to go to Gab and Gettr, or more likely Gab, to find out what people are speaking of without any restriction. And so there are people who are returning to it. It's not just like die-hard people, for the most part, who are on Gab, but there is, they are a larger portion of the people than is on Twitter, where it's just like a ton of normies who are on Twitter. So by getting kicked off Twitter and other places, you are being barred from the public forum. And now you still have backups. You can still talk to the people who are most committed, who are most interested in your message and are willing to hear you out and are like-minded. We still have the ability to talk to those people, which is great and is necessary, because, as I said, the alternative is not talking to anybody. It's just sitting in your own living room and talking to yourself, or being banned from the internet. It's like you're not completely banned from the internet, but you are banned from the town square, and it does limit our speech, and it does limit our ability to interact with the public, which is why it's necessary to, push back against the censorship on the big tech platforms, and to pass laws or push for government action to correct this problem so that the town square does not completely become dominated by liberals. And another thing is, like, some people will say, well, we'll just let them have the town squares. We'll have our own spaces and we'll build them up bigger. I'm a little skeptical that we can create something that will replace Twitter and others, just because the fact we can't attract like the big entertainers and the big politicians. Well, I mean, we are attracting some politicians, but the entertainers, athletes, other major figures that made people go to the big tech platforms when they're first starting up. It's like, oh, my favorite celebrity or my favorite athlete likes to post on Twitter. I'm going to sign up and see what it's about. You don't necessarily have that with Gab, where it's like, well, my favorite YouTube podcaster who's highly respected is on Gab. I want to see what he's up to. There are some people like that, but there are far more people wanting to hear what LeBron James or Jennifer Lawrence has to say. I don't think Jennifer Lawrence isn't actually on Twitter anymore, but LeBron James is, and they sign up for Twitter and Instagram. And so that's because they know that, and that becomes the town forum of our age. And that's just where events happen. Now, some platforms could expand themselves. I was saying this with like Gettr, is that, they could expand by getting some of the big game streamers or some of the big athletes or sports commentators to join in or making like partnerships with some of the sports betting platforms or even gaming platforms to, bring people in. I think that maybe Gettr or another platform could do this. I don't necessarily know if Gab could do this. It would be great if Gab could, but how corporations operate and these people operate, and they're like, oh, I don't want to go to the evil racist platform. And unfortunately, Gab has that reputation, and also they're going to be like, you should censor more. And of course, Gab's never going to do that. So I don't know if that can happen with Gab, but Gab exists. I mean, as I keep saying, I mean, the reason why the chief selling point of Gab is that you have absolute free speech on there. And that, they're not going to change that, but that does close some doors for Gab. Unfortunately, because all these corporations are like, don't want to have total free speech. And so and same with the entertainers and some of the big figures who get on there. But, I think Gab is succeeding in doing its own thing, and it's going to keep growing at doing its own thing. And it's fine, what it's doing. And we need something like that. And we do have so many alt-tech platforms that are growing. I mean, you have Rumble. I mean, people have problems with Rumble, but I think there are less issues. I know of some criticism with Rumble, but I think they're less onerous than the problems that are going on with Gettr and some of the more mainstream conservative attempts at creating an alt-tech platform. I know that they don't censor like Jared Taylor and some other people that other platforms would censor. So I feel like it has a great amount of free speech. BitChute's had a lot of problems, but it's still around. Odyssey is like also is like a Gab version of YouTube. It seems to have total free speech. A lot of people seem to like it, and there's even other attempts. Like Nick Fuentes now has his own streaming platform with Cozy TV. Infowars has their own thing. I think Gavin McInnes has something similar to that with. I always forget if it's like censored or banned.tv. I always forget if it's censored.tv. I think it's censored.tv. And so there's other people who are able to create their own platforms even when they're deplatformed and they're censored and they're blacklisted, and they're able to carry on. So that's very reassuring. I don't think back in 2016 we were first seeing the censorship wave happen and people getting banned for these platforms. They're like, well, where else are they going to turn to? And now there are places that they're going to turn to. And of course there's Telegram, which even I see some, problems going on with the criticisms of Telegram, of like saying that there's some speech monitoring there, or there's some things that are, a little goofy going on with Telegram. I haven't really seen that. And just like looking at some of the things I'll go on Telegram and see from, I'll just be searching around, and I see some like, wow, this is some pretty radical content on Telegram that they're having, and it doesn't appear to be censored. But I don't know what's the case with that. I mean, there's always going to be these issues with it. So there are fairly strong free speech alternatives to the big platforms. But the one big problem that I haven't gotten to yet and it's a major challenge with alt tech, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have to keep fighting to be on the major platforms, not just so we can interact with the public, but it's also the issue that we may be restricted to our own little ghettos. And I'm not saying like Gab is a ghetto, but I'm just using ghetto as a as the best word to use here, is that we'll end up being in our own ghettos and we're just talking to ourselves, and then the public has no idea what we're talking about, has no idea what we're about, and they carry on because the whole town square is dominated by liberal discourse, and they set the parameters. And that's all the viewpoints that normies hear, is that all the alternative viewpoints, the radical viewpoints, are put over into the ghetto, well away from the town square, and all the normie, respectable people don't hear about it at all. And they are just left alone in peace and walking around and enjoying life and, staying double masked and quadruple vaxxed, and everything's just going on as planned. And this is the only and everyone like them is doing the same. They're double masked too, and that's because they're not hearing any alternative viewpoints. There are many problems with being stuck in the ghetto. Some of them are pretty obvious. Like, one, you're not interacting with the public. You're just you're not able to impact public decisions or what goes on in politics or and the culture at large. You're just in your little ghetto. You're a despised minority. Nobody wants to be like that. Another problem with being in the ghetto is that there's a cycle of radicalization within the ghetto that happens. Now, some people may think that, that's base radicalization. Yeah, we want to get more radical. But it gets into this perspective where you become so alienated from the mainstream is that you don't know how people think and operate. And you just operate and think that the stuff you hear within your own ghetto is what is the mainstream, and that's all you need to worry about. And you'll be adopting all these positions and ideas and theories that if you go up to a normal person, they're going to be like, what the hell is this crazy man talking about? It's like wild-eyed, it's like, let me tell you how the moon is controlled by Israel. And then you're just like, oh my God, please let me go, sir. The normal person can be like that. And like, so there's this process of extremism, which, I'm not trying to say like a de-extremism expert or like SPLC, but it comes from, I'm speaking on a pragmatic matter, is that if we're not interacting with the mainstream and the public, we think that we're talking to our chorus, we're speaking to the chorus. That's all we're trying to please. Is that we then come into like people like trying to one up each selves, like, oh, well, you say this, but I say this, and like, well, I actually agree, but now I'm saying this. And it's like this process of radicalization and adopting these theories and ideas that are appealing to the base that you have within the ghetto. And then that creates this ideology and platform where you then try to show it off to the mainstream public, and you've only been sharing these ideas and theories within that ghetto and within people who are receptive to it and who are encouraging themselves to get more radical, extreme, and not cuck out. And so they adopt these positions, and then you try to bring this out to the public, and you're like, hey, this is what I'm about. And they're like, dear God, what the hell is this? I have no connection with this at all. And then they like run away from it, and you can't interact with the hoi polloi. I don't want to call them the hoi polloi. That's a little mean. But the masses and normies, to an extent where if they hear it, they think you're essentially promoting the equivalent of Satanism or something like that. So that's one of these issues that happens with it, is that there is this process of over radicalization is a better way to say that, because you're just within talking to people who share all the same ideas, and there is this encouragement. It's like, well, why don't you believe in this and that? And it's like, we don't need to worry about normies. This is what appeals to them. And you don't have to worry about appealing to normies, because the only people you're talking to are within that ghetto. And the rulers and the regime are fine with that. As the further out there and the easier it is for them to portray us as kooks and cranks that they, you just can easily discard and laugh at, or laugh at best, or be terrified and demand the FBI arrest them at worst. That supports the regime's interests. Like, the regime does not want normie people to see presentable ideas that appeal to them, that is capable of making them think differently from what the regime wants them to think. And the the easiest way the regime can do this is to ostracize us and make us sound as ridiculous as possible. And if we follow what they want to do and we become more ostracized and alienated from the mainstream and adopt these like loopy ideas that, sounds good in the ghetto, but when taken outside the ghetto, people are like, what the hell is this? That supports the regime's interests. And, I don't think the regime, even though they are worried about Gab and these tech platforms, they do just want to put us into a corner. They want us removed from the town square entirely. They would like us removed, like to be non-exist at all. But if taking what the alternative of us being able to interact with the town square of our age or being shunted off into a ghetto, they'd much rather prefer the ghetto. I mean, they've had extremists and other kooks in their respective ghettos for a long time. They never interact with the public. But due to the rise of social media, alternative ideas and ideas that challenge prevailing narratives have been able to get out there and have influence and change the course of history. I mean, it helped Donald Trump get elected in 2016, and they want to shut this down. They want it to return back to the way things were in the 90s and 80s, where they are able to control the discourse entirely, and they're able to portray people who challenge the discourse as total loons that you shouldn't listen to, and everything's in control. The adults are in charge. Everything's great. Don't listen to the loons, because guess what? If you're going to listen to the loons, you're going to have to go into the ghetto as well. So this is a problem that we have to avoid when we get stuck on our own platforms. That we do realize that we're not interacting with the public at large. There are all these people out there who are not on the same page as us, and we do have to understand that we need to tailor our message to them and not go too far off the deep end and sometimes that if you're just stuck in your ghetto, that'll happen with the type of people, because you're just talking amongst yourselves and people want something new and different, and they'll just encourage people to grow more radical and adopt like the more loopier ideas, and then you're in a strange place afterwards. And I think this happened in some cases. I think one of the problems that happened with the alt-right, and especially in 2017, is that even though it was facing some not as much censorship as they did now, but it was facing a degree of censorship, and some of these people began just talking among themselves, and they thought that they represented the whole population and that they didn't need to worry about interacting with normie Trump supporters anymore or tailoring the message to them. It's like they had this message that millions of people were on their side, and this is what they were telling themselves. And then when they showed it off to the public for the most part rejected it. And I think a lot of people still have that mindset that they imagine that there is this great masses ready to be awakened due to this message that these people have just been sharing among themselves, and it feels like it's popular among their own crowd. But when they take it to the larger public, the public is like completely rejects it. And we have to avoid that in order to gain success and to achieve victory. So that is one of the challenges of alt tech. I mean, there's several other challenges with alt tech. I mean, the fact that still a lot of these, even though they can get off Twitter, is that, service providers and people like Apple about letting their apps on phones, and Google, being able to allow people to search for it, and domain hosts, able to censor. There are still a lot of challenges with that and getting around that. And it is really that even if you build these platforms and people are, a lot of libertarians like, just build your own. And it's like, well, do the way the market operates, especially in the tech world. Like one can't just simply build it on something on your own. I mean, Gab has had to struggle a lot with censorship on its own, and it's finally built a successful platform through that struggle. And not every platform is going to make it through that process. And while alt tech is good and it is necessary, it is not the ultimate solution. We still have to push for changes to the law or change from the government to correct the censorship of the big tech platforms. Until they're replaced, I could still see, we could be by the time of 2024 where Twitter and Facebook are not as popular. I mean, TikTok was not popular at all in the 2016 election, and now it's the most popular social media platform of them all. It exceeded YouTube recently. And, it wasn't really around. And there could still be another platform that comes from another place. I don't think it'll come from the people who are pushing alt tech. It could be something completely different that people aren't really talking about right now. And then that could replace Twitter as the town square of 2024. But in order to ensure we have access to it, it has to come from our lawmakers, taking these platforms and their execs to task for their censorship and changing the law in order that they are required to operate as neutral political forums that are not altering speech, are not censoring speech, are not pushing the platform to reflect their own political biases. And I think that is absolutely necessary because we still need access. It's great that we do have these tech platforms that we can now speak freely and we can share our views with whoever chooses to listen to them. But for right now, the public is on the big tech platforms, and we need to have access to the public forums of our age in order to succeed and achieve victory. So those are my final thoughts on the challenges of all tech platforms. And yes, I'm hopefully with anything I want to emphasize I am pro most of these alt tech platforms, especially Gab and others. And this is me saying this on YouTube, and I'm probably tweeting this out from my Twitter. I still have these, fortunately still have these for now, but I'm probably not going to I may not have them for long. We don't know. You never know what happens with the censors. And I'm grateful that, if I got kicked off these platforms, I would have a backup to share my message with the world and still spread IQ supplements to all who would listen. So I am thankful for that. Now moving on to the next topic, and speaking of IQ supplements, because this deals with that, is like last week I had a very highly contentious IQ supplement I posted where I said, we're not German, and a lot of people got angry. And then I posted, some people insisted that we should be German, and I posted a very funny German soy jack video produced by one Bach Groiper. I think he may have been banned a few times, but now he goes under the handle Fugue Groiper, as in Toccata Fugue in D minor. Famous piece by Bach. He does a lot of great content. You should follow Fugue Groiper. It's at Fugue Groiper, and that's F-U-G. I just said G. F-U-G-U-E Groiper. And so give him a follow. He's got some funny content. I think he's German himself. And he posted this video, and it's like this German soy jacks and M jacks dancing around. And there's like an angry soy jack who's in like German flag colors is doing stuff. It's very funny. You will watch it. And it's set to this funny German folk song. And people got very mad about it. There was an account that said that I will suffer an agonizing death, worse than the lefties. When they take power. I don't know who's taking power, but somebody's taking power, and I will suffer a worse death than the lefties because of this video. So, if whoever those people who are very aggrieved by the video take power, I guess you guys will not hear much from highly respected anymore. But I don't think that day's going to happen. Anyway, when I had this, there was some not so serious comments from people who were like Indian or Dominican, who are just saying that they believe that any attacks on German is anti-white racism, and it's not an attack on Germans. It's just simply making fun of American right wingers who think that they're German and that their whole history is shaped by Germany, and they're not German at all or have very little German heritage. And it's more of a correcting about like where our heritage is that we are most white Americans are primarily or have a large degree of Anglo ancestry. That's the largest ethnic group in the country, and that's what most people assimilated to. But there were some serious criticism. I talked to some people. There was some pushback is that saying, well, Scott, we understand that you're trying to create an ethnic connotation for Americans, is that there's not really a good term for it. But, and you're trying to say Anglo-American, and we get that point, but we think that you're going too far because there's all these white ethnics who are based and they're keyed. I said based. We're supposed to say keyed now. Ethnics are keyed. They get all the issues, but they are never going to see themselves as Anglos. And a lot of these guys, they don't have much Anglo ancestry. And there is a lot of people like that. There are Italians who have very little Anglo ancestry. Any non-Italian ancestry they have is like Polish or Irish, and it's the same with some of these other ethnic groups that came over in the 20th century or after the Civil War, is that they don't have much Anglo ancestry. And if you tell them they're Anglo, they're like Mark Pizzioli or whatever is going to be like, I'm not Anglo, I'm Italian American. And you could say that that's like excluding a lot of our base people I keep saying base. We gotta say keyed, excluding some of our keyed people who are not gonna be, who are not gonna consider themselves Anglos, and I do consider that as true. I think the better way of describing this is just simply saying American. Is that most of the groups that don't call themselves Americans want to use a hyphen or they use some other term to describe themselves as their ethnic group. They'll just say they're, they're black, or they're AAPI is what Asians are calling themselves now, or some other group. And then not our Native Americans, which we, as you know, as all highly respected listeners should know, that the real Anglo-American or the real Native Americans are Anglo-Americans. Messing up a lot of things here. First, I'm saying base instead of keyed, and now I'm getting Native American and Anglo-American mixed up. How could I do this? But you know what I'm saying. Going back to the point outside the mistakes, is that I think the best term is just American, but we do have to emphasize the Anglo aspect because that's what most of the founding population was. That's what most of the people who settled here prior to the revolution, prior to 1800, assimilated to. Yeah, there was a strong German element here. They were a minority though, and a lot of them didn't refuse to speak English, but they were a minority. I think they were only like 10 or 15% of the population. Rough estimate. Some people could fact check me, but the large majority, I think it was at least 60% that were English, and then other groups were like ones who had already assimilated to essentially being English, even if their last names were not necessarily English origin. As I like to argue, or as I argued a lot on Twitter, not really arguing, stating facts, is that a lot of people with like French surnames or Scottish surnames or Dutch surnames, like the Roosevelts, I know they had pretty much become, almost virtually English by the time of the 19th century. Even that's the case in my family. Greer Scottish, but the family, all the wives we took were English and primarily made us English. And there's not really any connection to Scotland or Scottish culture. I mean, we just became Anglos. Yeah, we had a Scottish last name, but the names we were giving our children were English, popular English names. Even though we came from the lowlands, which spoke Scots, which is closely related to English, then there weren't any real differences between us and the Anglo mainstream. And so that's really what the point about saying Anglo-American is, that like pretty much most of the founding stock of America is Anglo. Pretty much if you have any ancestors who have been here since prior to the Civil War, it probably means you have a large degree of Anglo ancestry, possibly a quarter or more. And I think that's like something that like we need to understand and embrace, is that this Anglo heritage of America. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to call themselves Anglo. I think just calling ourselves American is probably the better solution to this, because there's not really a good term that we have for connoting, the ethnicity, the, historic American nation people that have grown up, that ethnicity around it. I mean, people use these terms that are pretty good, like historic American nation, historic American people. I think that's a term that came from Gettr. That is like a good term, but it's a little long and unwieldy, but it gives off the point that we want to say. And you need a simple term. Anglos is pretty good, but, most people don't view themselves as Anglo, and a lot of the people that are on our side are, they're white and everything, but their family may have come over in 1910 and they don't have any Anglo ancestry, and there's a few people like that. So some people come up with these different terms. They say heritage Americans, which you just might as well say Anglo-Americans, because all the pre-Civil War immigrants here, as I said, are pre-Civil War people who were here, eventually mixed and merged with the Anglo population, even though there were some outposts of German culture, particularly out in the Midwest, that stayed pretty much exclusively German up until the 20th century. And even today, those places exhibit and are very proud of their strong German heritage and ancestry. So heritage American, with a few exceptions, generally means Anglo-American. And most of those Germans today who are German Americans who come from the pre-Civil War stock, they're not speaking German. They generally don't have Germanic first names. Some of them are devout Lutherans, but, there's not as strong, they have been Anglified in a large extent. So heritage American, it means the same thing as Anglo, a little bit more unwieldy of a term. Some people say Amerikaner, as I'm not really a fan of this, because one, it's a name of a cookie that mixes black and white together. It's a black and white cookie. And there's even like Obama used this thing that like America is like a black and white cookie, two-sided cookie. It's like we're mixing together, a little, I don't know if that's necessarily the appropriate term for what we're about. And it's also, it's a foreign term. It's people just like adopting Afrikaner and then putting Amerikaner in there. So I don't really think that's necessarily a good term. I think it's like a very foreign, it's going to sound foreign and alien to the normal people that are going to hear it. And then you have to go through this whole explanation of what it means. And a lot of these people are going to mispronounce it anyway. So not a fan of it, but I know what people are trying to say with that. And there's a bunch of other terms like Old Stock American that go into the same thing. And then people will just like, well, why don't we just say white American? Well, there's some problems with it. First off, there's a large social stigma about identifying as white in America. I mean, it would be great if we could correct that, but most white people are going to, they get very hesitant about being called that they're white. They're like, oh, well, no, white doesn't mean anything. I might be white, but, that's no big deal. Even whites who generally get this stuff, get very uncomfortable around it. And I think there's, people did try this, in 2016 and 2017 to make it, exclusively a white identity and just like proclaiming white. And, it didn't work out for, as people can see. It's like, it's rejected by that way of identifying themselves is rejected by a large amount of Americans. And it also creates a type of identity that is bereft of like real ethnic differences. A lot of what the people were describing as white identity was this pan-European universal identity that was picking random stuff from various European cultures. And a lot of this stuff that ordinary white Americans can't relate to and just saying, this is your culture. And if you ever watch like these videos from like the alt-right in 2016 or whatever, their videos like, what is our identity? And they have like this video, and sometimes they'll include clips of like the bad things that are going on, and it's like some black kid in Baltimore beating up a white kid or whatever, and it's like dark music, and it's like, oh, what's happening? And then boom, and it's like the fast wave comes on, and it's like, oh wow, and it's like it's synth wave, and it's got vaporwave aesthetics, and for some reason we're learning about white culture, and the first image you see is Wehrmacht goose stepping into France, and you're like, I don't know how this. I guess they're goose stepping over to Baltimore to save Baltimore now. They time traveled, and then it's like got clips from Lord of the Rings, which I like Lord of the Rings, but Lord of the Rings is not describing a real world or real traditions. It's a fantasy world, so you'll see like Minas Tirith, and then you'll go, and then they'll have like a positive clip, so like we're pro family, and then they'll have like clip of like Serbian folk dancing, and it's like, this is your tradition and culture, and it's like, I don't really have any relationship to Serbian folk dancing, but okay. And they'll just like show these random clips that is just like a mishmash of random stuff from Europe that even most Americans, like even if they have those ethnic origins in those various places, they have no connection to. So it eventually just becomes like this grab bag of random stuff, and then you're just like, okay, like the white identity is like Wehrmacht soldiers marching, Lord of the Rings, and Slavic folk dancing. Like, what? This isn't connected to real traditions and to the heritage of actual Americans. And so it just kind of become this blank slate that people would just like add stuff to. And of course, there would also be Greek and Roman statues throughout this video as well. And that's another part of the identity. And as I argued with, or talked about with Nightmare Vision in our series on the alt-right, we did say, I did make this point, is like people would say this is a fake identity. But for most Americans today, their identity is like situated in entertainment or sports. It's like their identity is based around some sports team. It's like, that's a fake identity. A real identity is being a New England Patriots fan or something like that. So and that's just as fake as artificial as, or in a lot of ways even more fake and artificial than saying like I'm a proud white person, this is my culture. Then you're showing this video of Slavic folk dancing and Greek statues, and you're like, well, you don't really have a real connection to that. But compared to like other people who think that their whole culture and identity is centered around a sports team or like rap music or fast food, you're like, okay, well, like this is a culture. America is unfortunately about picking these artificial elements and then basing identities around them. So it's not like that. But when you're trying to appeal to large swath of ordinary Americans, like this stuff is just like, what is this? I mean, and people tried to present this stuff as like, this is your identity. Aren't you going to be about this? And people rejected it. They're like, no, I'm an American. And that is ultimately what the identity is. And I think as more over time, as the left becomes anti-American, anti, the flag, anti the symbolism, anti founding fathers, we can take American as our identity and strip it of all the cringe that has been associated with it ever since the end of World War II. And then we can make it our own and just saying this is our real identity. We have the flag. We have the national anthem. We have the founding fathers on our side. This is what our identity is. This is what we're, our unique culture, our unique heritage, and our unique traditions that we're about. And it can't necessarily just be this like universal thing that like nobody really relates to, and it's just like a grab bag of stuff, and it's like something artificially created. Like this is an identity that's existed for hundreds of years. It goes back into the colonial era, and we are simply upholding it and making it stronger for the future. And the left is really helping us out here by saying like everything associated with America is like racist and evil and white supremacy and white privilege and stuff. And we can, and it's like taking away people who were exploiting this term, 20 years ago, 20 and 30 years ago, and making it mean like some multicultural mass of consumers. Now they're trying to distinguish it and trying to create a post-America. And we're there left with being able to have now the power and ability to define what a real American is, shorn off of all the cringe of the past and now making it realize its true identity and true heritage. And that presents an opportunity for us. So the stuff that I talk about Anglos and stuff, when I say we're not German, we're American. I also say that we have assimilated into Anglo culture, or Anglo-American culture, and most of the white Americans are Anglos. For many different reasons, and that is the origin and roots of American culture. But the bigger term that people actually identify with is American. We just have to define it and move it in the direction that we want. And when people hear that term, it connotes a unique people that are not just defined by a piece of paper or by their commitment to democracy or liberal ideas, that there are people with a unique culture, unique heritage, unique traditions, and their unique country that makes them different from the rest of the world. And not everyone in the world can be an American. You have to have those distinguishing characteristics in order to be an American. And I think we'll have the power and ability to do that in the future. So that's what we define ourselves. We just call ourselves American, but we have to remember where we come from, and Anglo-Americans are the founding stock. So that's me clearing up some of the arguments there. I still like using the term Anglo in some ways in distinguishing various groups of people, and using that as like the generic, white American of like old stock, primarily old stock heritage. But we're also including the ethnics in here and other people who want to identify as American, who see themselves in America's unique heritage and history. Now onto the last topic before I get to the cognitive elite question. I'm going to have to talk a little bit about national divorce. I know there's going to be some groans out in the audience like, Scott, you have talked about this enough. Please don't talk about this anymore. But I have got to bring up just some points that I saw over Twitter this week. And this is usually what inspires the podcast, is just things I see on Twitter. There are two different things that I want to mention just briefly. I'm not going to keep this too long. Watch this turn into a 30-minute segment, but I'm not going to keep it that long. I asked a simple question over the weekend to try to show how people aren't thinking through this national divorce thing. I asked simply, what would be the capital of Red America in a national divorce? Most of the answers were, I was like, I'm going to get some not very well thought out answers. And sure enough, I didn't get well thought out answers. Pretty much every answer I got was that of an extremely blue city. It got Memphis for some reason, which Memphis is like too dangerous to even have a business in, much less have a capital. I mean, I guess Washington, D.C. was the murder capital of America for a long time in the 80s and 90s, or was always competing for it. And we still had our capital there, but you don't necessarily want to move to Memphis. Memphis is a terrible place. It is not a good city whatsoever. Some people suggested New Orleans, which might even be worse than Memphis from that perspective. Totally incapable, and it also succumbs to a really bad hurricane every 10 years or so. Not necessarily the ideal location for capital. same set of problems you have as Memphis. Some people suggested Atlanta, which people have said is the blackest and gayest city in America. I don't necessarily think of that as red America. And then they've suggested Austin, which is Portland and Texas. And people, and it's like they suggested all these really extremely left-wing places that are not going to want to separate at all. They're going to want to stay. And even people suggested Denver, which is incredibly left-wing city, almost as bad as Austin, if not equal. And all these places don't want to be a part of a national divorce. All those people who are like economic leaders and control the city and are the like mayor and city council, they're going to be like, hell no, we do not want to separate. You cannot put a capital here. We want to stay with blue America. And a lot of people just couldn't think this. So some people had some cope. They're like, well, we'll march all the libs out and we'll take over the city. And then okay, so we'll have mass population displacement and ethnic cleansing over, over being a libtard. I guess maybe some people would be up for that, but I don't think most people are yet. I don't think they're up to that point yet. I mean, some people just like don't think, and people think this is like going to happen in a few years. And who's going to do that? I mean, the military's probably going to stay with who pays them, and that's largely blue America. And now all the people who want a national divorce want to abolish all police and hate cops. So it's not going to be police officers because, we don't need police at all in red America. And then police are blue pilled. We don't want them at all. So I don't know who's going to march them out. I guess just people are going to organize. This is very similar to the arguments about when you told people people always like to insist that conservatives control the food supply. And I'm like, no, they don't. The food supply is controlled by major corporations who are in large part using migrant labor to pick and process this food. And then when you tell this, conservatives should just take it over and they'll run the farms. Who's going to run the farms? You're kicking out the migrant laborers. You're kicking out all the people working on it. You're taking some people who are not trained at all to run these major farms. And you're just like, yeah, well, we'll just run it. And people don't think of these things, and they still will then insist that we control the food supply, even though being told that we don't technically control the food supply. So people cling on to these ideas that you just simply state simple facts and then tell them about the logistics of this occurring and the major problems that would happen. And people, they just get angrier at this. When they're exposed at how ridiculous this sounds and how unrealistic it is, they just get angrier and more fantastical and more delusional in this idea. And I'm just simply telling people, national divorce is ultimately a cope. People think that, saying it's not going to happen as a cope, but no, national divorce is a real cope because it's just people imagining that they can escape from these problems, that they can just have this wave a magic wand and all the problems go away and somehow red America is going to separate. And that's just not. As I said, the only escape is victory, and we have to work with what we have instead of going on these delusional ideas that are just not going to work and what most Americans don't want. I mean, most Americans are not down for national divorce, and if you actually began telling them what would happen under national divorce, they would pretty much large scale oppose it. People, I think the signs of support for it and discussion of it is a sign of growing polarization in our nation and a growing sign that people are willing to think outside the box and are not as loyal to the regime as they once were in 20, 30 years ago, and are beginning to question things at a much greater level. But ultimately, national divorce is just silly. And I think that one of the ways to look at how silly national divorce is I saw a map that was being shared around. This actually comes from 2018. I think it was done by a liberal, but I'm not sure, of how America would separate between red and blue America. And I've seen maps that are similar to this, people have created over the last year or so, or last few months, that are similar to this. And this map is pretty much accurate about what would happen. So in this map, libs would get all the coastline. They get the entire coastline, west and east coast. There's a few little pockets. There's one little pocket in North Carolina and one pocket in, I think it's southern Oregon and northern California that would go to red side. But then the whole rest of it, and even the border with Mexico, goes to the blue America. And like we get most of the interior, but then there are these like these blue lines throughout America that connect, east and west coast. And it looks like, if we wanted to gerrymander a country, what liberals always complain about gerrymandering, it's like, they're drawing these like fake lines and connecting places that should have no connection to each other, and they're putting them in congressional districts. Well, this is what it looks like for a nation, because there's no natural barriers here or anything. It's just like, these areas vote blue, and we need to make sure that they're still connected. So we'll draw a blue line here, and maybe the blue areas get control of the interstate that connects them, but red America doesn't, and it's just so unfeasible. And you're looking at, and red America still gets some of these very blue cities, like I think like Austin and Dallas and Houston. Dallas isn't necessarily as liberal, but Houston is in there. Memphis and some other places are still in there, but most of the major cities go to blue side and they get the entire coastline. And then you're like, red America is now a landlocked country, and the only areas that we have that are, that have a coastline, we have no way to connect it to, because we're blocked by blue America and they're surrounded by blue America. And why are people agreeing to this on any way? I mean, the only coastline we would have is the Gulf side of Florida, and I think Alabama and Mississippi, those coastlines. So we have Mobile and Tampa as the major parts, but most of the rest of the coastline, the coast, east and west coast, go entirely to the liberal side. So this is just like kind of ridiculous. If you like look at, I should really just want to show this map, and it's like, does this look like two real countries to you, or does this look like we just decided to gerrymander stuff? Does this look like a real solution to you? And if you say yes, you really need to think through this thing. If you simply say no, you realize how ridiculous national divorce is. I really just want to show this map. I'll probably tweet out this map after the podcast, and just showing like, does this look like a realistic solution? And this is what people realistically propose. Propose with it, and it's just, it's not. We're not at that point. People need to focus on real ideas and practical matters. I understand where people are coming from with national divorce, but we need to stop living in delusion and stop trying to escape our problems, and try to fix our problems where they're at, and offer pragmatic solutions instead of offering fantastical ideas of how to solve our problems or running away from them. Now time for the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at highlyrespected.substack.com. And you should subscribe to the Substack anyway, so you can listen to these contentious IQ supplements that boost your IQ. And even I've gotten reports that some people have even noticed a increase in their height after listening to IQ supplements. So if that's not going to get you to sign up for IQ supplements, I don't know what will. But this question comes from Cargo Shorts Respecter. We love Cargo Shorts Respecter. Even though people know that I'm a known opponent of Cargo Shorts, I will respect the man who is brave enough to call himself Cargo Shorts Respecter and ask me questions. But this is a pretty good question. He asks, what is the highly respected opinion on Blake Masters, the Arizona candidate? Cargo Shorts Respecter is a little worried that he's a little sketchy and shady, and maybe we shouldn't trust him. There's some worries about this, and he worried am I off the mark? And I want to assure Cargo Shorts Respecter that he is off the mark. I think Blake Masters is a very good candidate they're running, and it's the type of candidate we want to run. Pretty much, if you look at his whole message, it's everything we want to hear from a candidate. He's an immigration restrictionist. He's noticing the war on whites and anti-white racism that is prevalent in corporate trainings and an education system. If he's campaigning on how, we want to have strong families where a single breadwinner can provide for a whole family. That's a very good message. He's strong on foreign policy. He's strong on election integrity. When it comes to his rhetoric, I don't think there's anything you can really complain about. And people have been wanting these type of candidates to run for years and years and years. And now in 2022, we finally have a lot of these candidates. Joe Kent in Washington is running on a similar message. Very charismatic guy. I think he's going to be a star. He just needs to win his race, but he's looking good, very good in the polls. I think if he wins the race, he's going to become a big-time star and will hopefully replace Dan Crenshaw as this person that people want to go to and think of a Republican star. We'd actually have somebody who's smart, and he's a veteran. He's a ex-special forces operator. His record can go up against Dan Crenshaw's any day. And unlike Dan Crenshaw, he's smart and has a great platform and great agenda. And he knows the issues. Unlike Dan Crenshaw, who just wants to grift and be an idiot and then attack people who make worthwhile criticisms of him. So we can finally have a star. And even though there are some issues with J.D. Vance is arguably echoing a lot of what we as American nationalists are about. Making similar message, making good points that, in years past we would have never heard a Republican say about immigration restriction and, anti-white racism in the schools and, a sensible non-interventionist foreign policy. So, and all these people are defending Kyle Rittenhouse. And so there's a lot of good things happening with these candidates. And there's many other candidates. Mo Brooks in Alabama is very good. John Gibbs in Michigan, who is a based black guy. I'll use based here for this example, who is running on a solid America First agenda. His campaign platform, I'm like, wow, this is really key. Looking at it, and there's several other candidates who are running on great platforms and messages. Some I don't know how well they're doing in their campaigns, but a lot of these guys are competing. They're raising a lot of money. They're getting a lot of attention, and we finally have genuine America First candidates running. And I think people always want to be suspicious on our side. He's like, this guy is too good to be true. Like, who's controlling him? Who's his real handler? There's got to be something amiss here. And I think it's better to, be on the trusting side. Some people you should be skeptical of. I still think that there's warranted reason to have skepticism of J.D. Vance because he was such a vocal never Trumper in 2016 and a few of the others. But when it comes to Blake Masters, I think he's the real deal. And there are some issues with him, not necessarily with, his platform. I think maybe he may not be. Some people think of him as like running for president and stuff. I don't know necessarily if he has the charisma level to rise to that or really the type of star power to get to that level. But he's very good. He's a serious candidate. He's raising a lot of money. He's outperforming the front runner in terms of fundraising. It looks like Trump's going to endorse him or, and possibly even campaign for him. So, he's a serious guy. And if he became a senator, that would be terrific for America and terrific for our side. And I don't think there's any reason to be suspicious of them or skeptical of them. Maybe downplaying some of the, prospects that people think of, like Blake Masters, of what he could do, of him like running for president or him being the mythical caudillo that everybody wants. Maybe that's a little too far-fetched, but in terms of when it comes to his platform and him being a genuine America Firster, I don't think people need to worry about that. So those are my final thoughts on that topic, and those are my final thoughts for this episode of Highly Respected. So with that in mind, I'm going to remind people to subscribe to Highly Respected Substack so you can get listened in to all the IQ supplements, and to make sure you hit the like and subscribe button for Highly Respected's YouTube. So until next time, stay respected.